So we've got a couple of people joining us on Zoom, and I just want to thank them for joining us. Sarah Perry, Amber Lynn, Michaela Gresh, and Heather Lyons Edwards. Thank you guys for joining in. Sure appreciate that. Wanted to let you know that you would be entered into our drawing, and if you for the raffle at the end. And if one of you are drawn for that, then Rob will make sure that gift gets delivered to you. We're going to continue on. We've got our next speaker, and she comes to us from Cloverdale Funeral Home in Boise, Idaho. There, she's a licensed funeral director. She is a certified funeral celebrant. She's also a grief support specialist. And in addition to all of that, she's also a death care researcher and educator. She uses her research to bridge the gap between funeral industry and the community. Today she's going to give us a basic understanding of emotional first aid, or EFA, and how we can use that in the arrangement conference with families that we meet with. So join me in welcoming Heather Welborn.
Mm-hmm. Should I just put that in my pocket?
Mm-hmm.
Put that in my pocket. Okay. Just clip that. Okay. You can do that. Can I just shove it in there like that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Nope. Okay. Can you hear me? Does that work? Do I need to use that as well? Is it gonna?
One for the Zoom, and the other one is for us.
Hello. Okay. Well, so, technical difficulties. Pause. Start. Okay. Did that work? Okay. So let me just kind of start by saying, how did I get here? Really quickly. I could talk about this forever, so I'm really going to try to condense it into an hour for you because I have a whole bunch of stuff to go over. But as a funeral director, the reason why I started getting into emotional first aid skills and grief counseling and putting all of this together as a funeral director is because I burned out. And I burned out hard. And so I was meeting with about 5 to 7 families Monday and Tuesday, and then maybe like 2 or 3 a day after that. I was working 24 hours, 7 days a week, doing all the transfers myself, doing all the cremations myself, all the services. It was insane, and it was unmanageable. And I didn't know my why. I lost my why completely. And so I took a year off, but my heart still said I needed to do something for my community. I still needed to help people. And so in Boise, and I know that in Portland, and I know there's one in Seattle, there's an organization called TIP, Trauma Intervention Program. And so what it is, has anybody heard of that? So what TIP is, and TIP volunteers, it's all volunteer, and strangely enough, in the whole United States, I'm the only funeral director that's a part of it. But there are a couple corners. There's like healthcare workers, cashiers, bankers, anybody can be part of this. And what we do is we respond with the 911 dispatch system. We respond with fire, police, paramedics, coroners. We're often responding at the same time they are. And what we do is we provide psychological and emotional first aid skills so that the first responders can do their job. And you're like, holy cow. It's scary. It's intimidating. But as a funeral director, I've been on scenes, and that wasn't as scary to me as maybe some other people. But there is training. It's about a week and a half of intense training. And I'm going to give you a very, very short one for us in an hour. And what it teaches you how to do is how to help survivors, victims, witnesses, anybody who is on the scene, as long as it's not an unsafe scene, a bystander to a car accident, you're going with the coroner's office to deliver a death notification. We stay there and help that person find their source of strength so that the first responders can do their job and leave, right? We don't want to leave these people alone because research has shown us that when people's emotional and psychological needs are not met on scene and at that immediate time, their coping in the future goes down, right? And so we want to help them be able to mentally and physically be able to process things in a healthy way. So, obviously, as a funeral director, I'm like, holy cow, this relates. But also, I'm on the other side now, right? I'm at the home when the coroner comes and they call the funeral home, and the funeral home transport team is coming into the house. They're picking the loved one up off the floor. They're putting him on the cot in front of the family. I know what the scene was like before that. I know what the family felt. I know what all of those people felt and saw. And I know now how they're viewing us, right? That was huge. Because I saw what the zipper of the bag, I saw how that affected the family. And also I saw what they did good, right? And like how they talked to the family and how what they dressed had an effect on the family, because sometimes families would comment on that, right? And then when they left, I got to feel the environment and what was good, what was bad. And I was like, this is amazing for me. How do I get everybody else that my people, how do I get my people to understand what we're doing and what kind of effect we're having on people? And so a lot of times what happens in that moment is we ourselves are creating tons of secondary traumas in our family before we even meet with them. And that's pretty bad. That sucks. Because we see them after this whole crisis shock event has come in. We might see them the next day, the next morning, when they're coming into the funeral home. And we are assuming that they're grieving. But they might not be. They might still be in shock. They might not be to that grief yet, right? So one of the reasons why I handed out our little brochure, and anybody who is watching online, we can email that to you. So when I handed out, it seems silly, and like, of course I know what these terms are: grief, trauma, complicated grief. Of course we know what those are, but sometimes it helps to understand those, because sometimes it helps us to just reflect back on them. I've researched this. This is something that I read about every day, but I still read new literature, and sometimes somebody takes a different kind of angle on grief in itself. And so it's helpful to be reminded of where our families are when they walk into our funeral home. And so my approach to being a funeral director is a little bit different, and maybe for some people a little bit controversial. When I meet with a family, the first thing that I do is I really don't care about the deceased. I care about that person who just had to walk into my funeral home. That person is the one who I care what their physical body is going through, right? To us, we walk into a funeral home every day. That's nothing. Nobody ever walks into a funeral home for good reasons, unless you have an event center and then you're holding weddings and things like that. So let's get to it, right? So 3 takeaways from today. What are emotional first aid skills? Why should we know these things? And how can we apply these skills with our client families? So you guys are going to be proactive today. You're not getting out of doing something. So let's talk about what emotional first aid skills. I kind of already explained what those are. And there is a lot of different styles of emotional first aid skills, and there's a lot of different ways to train it. There's psychological first aid skills and emotional first aid skills. There is a little bit of a difference between the two. The main difference being that psychological first aid is typically used for like mass disaster crisis kind of situations. whereas using emotional first aid skills is usually something that's a little bit more intimate, on a deeper level. We're helping them with coping mechanisms in the future, those kind of things. So there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of different ways that it's taught. The RAPID model is coming from St. Johns Hopkins Hospital. The TIP model is what we use. All of these different kinds of things, these ones are more taught with like children and working in that area. So what it is not something that only professionals can do. This is something anybody can do. My friends and family know me. And so when they are talking to me about something private, they're like, stop tipping me. And I'm like, but I care. And so it's not professional counseling, because what we're doing is we're providing that initial kind of assessment, but we're also giving them somewhere to go. It's not psychological debriefing, and it's not asking anybody to analyze what happened, and it's not pressuring people to tell their feelings or their reactions. But what it is a whole bunch of other things. We are with emotional first aid skills, you're providing so much more that can help them in the future. So the goal, right? Our main goal, and I'm not going to reread this because you can all read, I'm assuming we're all adults here, but our main goal as funeral professionals is to go from trauma to grief to mourning. Trauma is that initial crisis, right? Grief kind of encompasses everything. So when we meet with families, they're going to be somewhere between here, right? They're not here yet. Because mourning is where we want to get them. That's the outward expression of grief. That's the funeral. That's the memorial service, the celebration of life. We want to help them get comfortable enough with their grief to be able to share it, right? And in doing so, we want to make sure that they're doing it in a healthy way, and it fulfills the emotional, psychological needs of the living, but also honors the deceased. So, why should funeral professionals do these skills? If I don't reference my notes, I'm going to get off track, you guys. Well, that's really, we really kind of already talked about that. So, the number one reason why we should practice these skills is because when we have a family that comes in, they're coming in and we have maybe, like I said, that first job that I had an hour to meet with everybody. And I did not, but my company had every single hour I had a family. So that means I maybe had 45 minutes with every single family because I had to take all the notes, do all the paperwork so I could get ready for the next family. That's a lot to do in a short period of time. And even now, I spend about 2 hours with the family. Anything more than 2 hours, it's exhausting for everybody. But 2 hours is still a very short period of time because we have to develop trust, because we have to have paperwork to sign, we have decisions to be made, we have things to pick out, we have dates and times and coordinating that has to happen, and we have to have them leave comfortable enough with us that they're secure and that they can trust us, they know that we have them, and maybe get a hug, right? So that's kind of the goal, but how do you develop trust? Anybody? It's a huge ask.
Pay attention. Listen.
Pay attention. So this was kind of like one of my huge research studies. How do you develop trust? Fast. Manage their certainty. There's a really awesome thing called certainty management theory. And create safety. If we can make them feel safe with us, it doesn't really matter what decisions are made at that time. If we can look, we don't want to take away their certainty because that's impossible. They're grieving. But if we can help manage it and let them know that everything's organized and together and we know what we're doing and they feel sure of us, then they can trust us, right? If we can satisfy these two things, we've got them, right? So how can we apply these skills with our client families? So we're communicating every day. We communicate verbally, non-verbally. I gave you a list of nonverbal communication, even though it's like, well, duh, we all know what nonverbal communication is. But I'm giving you it as a reference point because in the activity that we're going to do, we're going to use language because everybody knows what not to say, but nobody really knows what to say, right? And everybody has their opinions on it, and that's fantastic because everybody's different. So of course, there's many different ways that we can do it. So let's get into it. The 5 EFA skills are reach out, protect, reassure, organize, reinforce. As a trauma intervention specialist, when I'm on scene, they teach these 5 steps. They may not come in order. Obviously, reach out comes first. These may not go in order. But if you know those 5 skills, any kind of disaster, accident, suicide, death notification, any kind of scene that you're at, this works. It works for everybody. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain each one as what they are taught in crisis intervention, and then we're going to talk about how we can apply that to the funeral industry. So last night I printed that out for you. Okay, so reach out. So as a TIP volunteer, the very first thing that we are taught is, and it may sound strange, immediately go up to the person, stand by their side, put your hand on the middle of their back. You don't rub, you don't pat. You put your hand and you get to their level and you say, my name's Heather. The police asked me to be here with you today. Can you tell me what happened? It sounds strange, right? It sounds intrusive and it sounds weird. Like we can't do that. But when somebody is in an immediate state of shock, that's not intrusive to their brain, right? And you're saying, can you tell me what happened, just to get them to talk? And sometimes I'll spend a whole day with them with my hand on their back. And if I try to take my hand off their back, I feel their muscles tense, so I just leave it right there. I spread my fingers as wide as I can, even though I have small hands, just to make them feel a little bit more protected. But we can't do that. That's weird, right? The reach out is the most important one that we can do to develop trust. So what we're going to do, I see that you have that handout and then you have examples, and that's what the activity that we're going to get to is. So I'm going to go through these. I'm going to give my examples, and then we're all going to kind of split up. So as funeral professionals, the most important one to me is when that family walks in the door. I'm not going to reach out and put my hand on their back. I'm not going to grab their arm or pat them, or I'm not going to do anything like that. That's a little bit weird. But I am going to acknowledge that a physical, emotional person just walked into my door. And I'm also going to let them know that I know that. So we get in. Did I just shut this off?
Is the green light on?
The red light's on?
Oh, I think that means it needs better.
Did I mute it?
Nope.
Sorry. Thank you. So, wait, no, hello?
Make sure it's not muted.
Did I? Hello? Hello? Okay, good. So the very first thing I do when they sit down is I acknowledge who they are and I acknowledge what they just did. I say, I'm so sorry that you have to be here, and I'm so sorry that you have to meet me today. I come through those doors every single day, and I know that's nothing to me, but I know I wanted to just acknowledge what you just had to do today, and I'm sorry you had to do that. Nobody ever comes to see us for good reasons. That usually makes them laugh, right? But it also immediately develops a little bit of trust, starts making them feel safe. We can also use this for the telephone, right? When we get that first call or the researcher call, We don't call them pricing calls. We call them researcher calls because that's what they're doing. They're trying to find out information. What I do is if the death actually occurred, I reach out with my voice, right? I tell them, I'm so sorry you had to make this call today. I know it's a hard phone call to make. I'm sorry you're in a position to do that. Just acknowledging before, I know the first thing you're supposed to do is ask for the deceased's name, right? You're supposed to do that. But I prefer to focus on the person who's making that phone call first. We'll get to the deceased. We'll get to all that information. But what they did was just hard. Do you know when a hospital, the death in a hospital, they'll give them a list of funeral homes that they need to call, and they'll usually call to find pricing at different funeral homes. Have anybody ever actually had to do that? You've had to call different funeral homes to find pricing? And you had to say, I don't know your situation, but you had to say, I'm calling because my son just died and he's at the hospital. Try to say those words. That person just said those words to you. You got to acknowledge that. Yeah, you can ask what the son's name is, but that's clinical, and we need to talk to people relational, right? So you say, I'm so sorry you just had to tell me those words. We're going to walk you through this process. My job is to walk you through this process, and we got you. What is your son's name? Right? Acknowledge. Reach out with your voice, okay? So another way that we can reach out non-verbally is something we were talking about in there. Where are you sitting? Right? It's something a tale as old as time. We're sitting across from each other. As a TIP volunteer, I'm getting up to them and I'm standing right next to them. We don't have to do that. But what we can do is sit when they sit, stand when they stand, be on their level at all times, because that means that we're with them. One thing we also don't do as a TIP volunteer is we stand and face them. Because who's standing and facing them? The coroner who just told them that their son died. Right? Or the fire department who just told them that the fire, they lost everything in the fire. The first responders are the ones who face them and tell them the bad news. We're not the ones telling them the bad news. We're the ones walking through it with them. So what we're going to do is we're going to stand by their side, or at least stand, kitty corner to them, because we want to let them know that we are with them on this process. We are walking them through. We are a partner in this whole funeral ordeal, right? And even after. So those are some examples for that. So protect. This is one that I really like to use as a TIP volunteer because I like to use my body, right? So when you're on scene and it's all crazy and hectic and you have this one person who's being crazy trying to like manhandle the survivor or something, I just stand in front of them, I just block them physically with my body. But in this instance, we're also helping them emotionally and physically from harming themselves, from maybe seeing something they shouldn't immediately be seeing until maybe we get there and can make it a little bit more presentable. As a TIP volunteer, that's kind of how we're protecting our families. As funeral directors, we're protecting our families in the exact same way, right? We're protecting them from making decisions that may cause them harm in the future. We're protecting them emotionally so that this is where helping them grieve in a healthy way comes into play. We're walking them through these steps. We're telling them maybe you don't want to have the service tomorrow because grief doesn't work like that. Just because you're going to get the casket in the ground and the burial's going to be done doesn't mean that your grief is over. There are a lot of things that need to be done before the funeral takes place, and maybe going through those things and looking through the photos and writing the obituary. These are things that are going to be cathartic for you. They're going to be helpful for you to process your grief, right? So we're protecting our families from sometimes making choices, and every family is different, so this doesn't apply to everybody, but making choices that might be harmful for their grief process, right? It's also another way to protect them is letting them know that they're in charge, right? Letting them, if there are many family members and everybody hates each other, but there was one person who has that durable power of attorney for healthcare, that's the person who that deceased wanted in charge of making those decisions. Letting that person know, you are my boss, right? You are in charge. You get to make the decisions. I know everybody else is going to try to take over. Don't worry, right? You're the one who gets to make the choice. And just hearing that from a stranger, or the person who actually has the deceased in their hands, right? That can be important. So we also want to protect them in a way by, who was I talking about? We're talking about watching their body language, right? If they're moving fast, talking fast, breathing fast, we want to help protect them by slowing them down, right? And was it you? Yeah, okay. Yeah, one way that we can do that, right, is by slowing ourselves down, slowing our breathing down, sitting back in our chair, concentrating on our breath, lowering our voice. It may seem really exaggerated and really obnoxious to you, but it's also giving them unconscious cues to do the same. Like we have this thing called mirror neurons that we learn as infants. It's just in our natural process to want to kind of copy the person who's in front of us, right? And so if we see that person's excitable, there's research that says that has been out for a while that says match their speed, right? That's kind of been discredited a little bit. And that's mainly because we started looking at escalation research. And so what a good in-between way to do that, see their speed, see their action, take it one notch down. Start there. Start one notch down from where they are, and then slowly, notch 2, notch 3, notch 4. Slow your pace slowly, step by step, and they'll come down 2. So that rather than just immediately going down to step 5. So, reassure. This kind of seems a little bit self-explanatory in our industry, right? We're assuring people. If they have a concern that they keep talking about, address it. That reassures them that you're listening. Because this is where listening, that you pointed out over there, comes into play. We need to listen to what people are thinking. Maybe before you jump into your spiel, is there anything at the top of your mind that you want to get to before I go into all of my questions? And then let them ask it. But don't go into it. Hear it. Right? Because that can take you off on a whole nother path, right? And now you have lost all control of this arrangement conference. So one way that we can reassure our families verbally is by letting them know that we know what we're doing, right? Give them a roadmap. Say, okay, so today, what we're going to go over in this conference, and you can do this on the phone too when you get that call and you're making the appointment for them to come in. Okay, at our appointment, what we're going to go over is we're going to go over some information for the death certificate, right? And then, but you can also do that when they're sitting in front of you. So today, what we're going to do, we're going to go over, and you can even write this down, right? Have a nice little printed form or something. I love my forms. And so you can print it out on a nice little form that says these are the things topics that we're going to go to today. They'll see there's the obituary is on that form. They see that we're going to get there. So that way we can say, they said their concern was the obituary. Absolutely, we're going to address that. But these are the things we're going to go to today, so we're going to get to that, I promise you, right? Let them know that you heard their concern, because that's reassuring. And so as you go through it, verbally state exactly what you're going to go through. Give them that verbal roadmap. But also, another verbal roadmap that they can hear is after you've made all the plans or while you're going to make the plans, or they're trying to decide between a church service with an escort and then a graveside or just a graveside. What does that look like? Verbally go through what it looks like, right? So when we're at the church, and you can talk about that as much as you want, the escorts are going to line us up and kind of explain how that happens. We're going to have the pallbearers come out and carry the casket to the coach. Everybody will get in their car. We're going to drive out there with the escorts. We're going to have the pallbearers meet at the back of the coach. And then just describe the whole process in as much detail as you want, but give it in a linear way. And then describe what the graveside, just doing a graveside. At the graveside, if we don't have casket bearers, well, then maybe we can have the casket preset for you, right? And explain what that looks like. You're going to show up at this time, and when you come in, you're going to be greeted by me. I'm going to be there, and I'm going to tell you where to sit or where to stand to greet your family, right? All of these things, because that lets them know that you know what you're doing. It seems strange that we have to say it, but it's reassuring, right? It's also helpful in that initial conversation when we're making the appointment to just get a little bit of clues, right? Do you guys have any idea about what your thoughts are, about what you're thinking about doing? And they'll tell you, right? Whether they don't know or, well, we definitely want cremation. But the people at Holy Apostles, I'll have to get in contact with them. Now you know they're Catholic. Now, are we going to have a Catholic Mass before the cremation? Or are we going to have a memorial Mass with the urn? So now we know all these options, but we know Holy Apostles. We know to get a hold of Kathy Rayburn, right? So before the family comes in, you've already called the church. You've already called the cemetery that they're thinking of. You know whether the cemetery requires a vault. You know what their opening and closing is. You know this information. I'm not sure if it works that way in your state, but for Idaho, that's how. And we own our own cemetery, so we have our cemetery people with us. And they've already done their pre-research. They know where all their family is in the cemetery. They know the locations of the plot. Sometimes we'll have a map. If it's not our cemetery, I'll print out a map of that cemetery that we're going to have to go to in the middle of nowhere and say, this is where your family is. This is the spot you're thinking about right next to it. So that they know when they showed up, I did my research. Holy crap, she knows what she's doing. She's got me, right? That's one way that we can reassure people. So next is organizing. And that's very similar. Back on reassure. A little note. And I say this because we have a lot of apprentices throughout my time as a funeral director, and maybe you do too. You see how people do things, right? In our industry, we have what's called the funeral director voice, right? Hello. The person I started working for, his voice was the funeral perfect. Oh, it creeps me out, right? Because it's not a real voice. And it immediately, if you can switch on a voice, that's weird, right? And people will see that. They'll see that that is fake empathy that you're showing, right? I had this one apprentice who would always bow. I don't know why he was bowing, but he would be like, and I'd be like, oh my God, stop bowing. You're freaking everyone out. But it was like that tick that we said we don't know that we do. Yeah. And he didn't know that he did that. He thought that he was just expressing sympathy. But the families were like, why is he doing that? I don't want him there at our next meeting. So think about these things that our physically our body is doing that is not reassuring, right? Sometimes we're talking about space in the arrangement conference, where we are, where we're standing, how we're touching, how we're not touching. Eye contact, that can be one of the most reassuring things that we can give to our families. You don't want to, because then they're like, should I blink first? Now they're not thinking about anything. They're just thinking about, oh my God, am I blinking? Is she blinking? Is she going to blink? Right? So think about that. Eye contact can be incredibly reassuring. So organize is something that we really already talked about, right? We talked about the roadmap. So as a TIP volunteer on scene, this is where we have our little notepad in our pocket, because sometimes some survivors are like, I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and they can't do anything because they have to do everything, right? So this is where you tell the family when you first meet with them. This is a verbal way to organize them. I am not expecting you to remember anything that we talk about here. I completely understand how grief brain works and what it feels like. So when you leave today, I'm going to write everything down on a list of anything that I might need back from you or that you might need to do. I'm going to write the dates, times, and locations of any decisions that we've made. So that way you have something to take home with you to remember what we talked about. But also I take really good notes. So you can call me because I can repeat myself all day. Because I do. Right? Let them know that. Let them know that they can shut their brain off, and all they have to do is how we're going to do this. We're going to make one decision at a time, and then we'll get there, right? You've organized their mind. You've let them know they don't have to remember. It's reassuring. You also let them know, a lot of people, right, they focus on the cost. So then you say, well, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to make a summary of the costs of everything that it is that we talk about. Don't give them your contract as a summary. It's confusing, it's overwhelming, and it can create a secondary trauma, right? Because then they're like, not only do they see this gigantic number, but now they have to decipher all these FTC sections, right? So write it out plainly and I can give you my template that I use. It's incredibly simple, right? Because I'm going to write down the costs of everything that it is that we talked about, not with them, I'm going to do it after. And then I'm telling them, we're going to look at that summary together, and if we want to make any changes before we finalize it, then we can do that then. That lets them know they're not stuck to something, right? But it also lets them know that they're going to understand what they're signing. So when I do give them that summary, it's so clear to them exactly what it is they're paying for, because we've talked about all of those items. They're like, that makes sense, okay. And usually I don't have to make a change to it. They understand. Or if it is overwhelming, then I say, okay, let's talk about another option. If we wanted to go just the graveside instead of the service in the graveside, this is what that would be. Here's the comparison cost. Typically, it's not a huge difference, honestly, with my funeral home. So that lets them know that they are in control. It lets their mind know that they are organized. And then when they approve it, then go print off your contract, have them sign it, and they can pay. So what you're doing is you're organizing their thoughts so that they know that you are together on this, right? That's the most important thing. So reinforcing. So this is where that source of strength comes in. And this is where starting a grief support group with your funeral home is very helpful. I highly encourage people to do that. So we have yearly grief support groups. We used to only do it in the fall and in the spring for like a 9-week session every Friday at 10 to 12 for 9 weeks. But we found that through COVID, a lot of grief supports in our area have shut down, and a lot of them are connected to churches that people don't want to go to because they don't either belong to that church or they don't want to be preached at. And so we have 6 weeks every Friday, 10 to 12 in our garden room. And then 6 weeks of that, and then 2 or 3 week break, and then 6 weeks. Everybody has that schedule. That schedule gets put out to our community, to our coroner's office, to other funeral homes, to nursing homes. Everybody knows about it, right? And so this is where reinforcing can help, because if they don't have a support structure, because you're going to ask them, do you have family in town? Do you have some kind of support with you, right? What do you do when they say no? Oh, I'm sorry. That sucks for you, right? No, you say, oh, well, I have some options for you, but I'm also going to take your name and number down because I'm going to give you a call every now and then. Is that okay? I don't want you to be alone. It's just a phone call. I know in our busy lives, a phone call seems like a lot because then we're like, oh my gosh, now we're going to be stuck on the phone with this 80-year-old man who's just going to talk forever. It's okay. Because that's kind of what we're getting at, right? That's kind of what this whole thing is getting at, is making our job worth doing for the long term. The more we can provide these kind of emotional first aid skills to our families and make our families feel emotionally connected and trusted with us, the more we will enjoy our job and the more satisfaction we will get from our job, right? We will feel secure knowing that we have not only done a really awesome funeral, but we have helped them through like the worst time in their life, and we get those little cards. We really wish that they were Google reviews, but we get the cards, right? And we get the thank you notes, and sometimes we get them on anniversaries, and those little things fill our cup because we need those, right? They usually come at a time when we really need them. So this emotional first aid skills, this isn't just for our families. It's for us. It's so that we don't burn out. Because like I was talking to you about, we can't be empathetic to everybody, right? So the way that we can reinforce ourselves, just kind of going off, I know I'm going off on a tangent, something that I learned in TIP. It's called the ick, okay? So the reason why the main reason why first responders are not TIP volunteers is because they have to have a wall in front of them. They cannot be empathetic and sympathetic, and they cannot give their heart to their survivors or the people that they're helping. They can't do it, or else they can't do their job, right? And in a way, we can't either, right? We can't be super empathetic people because we can't feel everyone's grief. We can't take it all in. It's too much. It's not our grief. It's theirs. We have to continually remember that that's their person. That's not our person. No matter how much that looks like your dad, right? Acknowledge it and also acknowledge that that is their grief. It's not yours. So one saying is never cry harder than your victim. Right? I cry all the time at work. I always tell families when they cry, I'm like, look, we buy it in bulk. We don't just buy it for you. We buy it for me too, right? I don't know if you read my blog, right? If you read the one I posted recently about, we had a lot of young suicides lately, and I had to sit with too many parents. Well, they did their private viewing where they saw their son or their daughter or whoever it was for the first time. And I did that in a one-day period, and I broke. I was like, I can't do that anymore. It was like, I had like 6 in January, and I just went in the hallway on the couch and just cried like a little baby for a while. And then I was like, okay, I'm good. Went back to the office and said, hey, you got that next one. And my coworker was like, yes, we do. You're good, right? And so that's okay, right? We have to allow. But we also have to make sure that ick is not on us. That ick is that thing that we take that makes us break down and cry, that we take home and we're like, oh my God, I can't forget this family. I can't forget this guy was a jerk to me. It might not even be grief that we're holding. It might be anger, because we are safe to be angry at. And so that ick factor is something where we put it on our hat, right? It's the hats we wear. That's our funeral director hat. That funeral director hat has ick all over it. And it's okay. It was designed to hold ick. I don't know if you guys wear hats out at your graveside. We do. It has the nice big brim. Holds all my ick. And then when I leave work, I take that hat off, I put it on my desk, and I go home, and I put on a different hat that doesn't have any ick on it. It's got a face of a cute little boxer. And yeah, And those are it has all of my loved ones, all those things that make me happy. It has that all over my hat, right? It's hard to do, but with practice you can do it, right? So, see, I told you if I didn't write notes, then I'm going to get off track. A nonverbal way we can reinforce. A note about, obviously, eye contact. A note about handshakes. So the most reassuring kind of handshake that someone can give another person is, I'm going to try to do this, right? The two-hander, right? You're not in shock and you're not grieving. That doesn't feel too weird, right? But for some people, privacy theory tells us that when somebody is in a state of shock or trauma, that can feel like an invasion, right? That touching can feel like an invasion. Anything like that. So of the hands, right? Touching of the hands, the arm, anything like that, a TIP volunteer does not do, right? That's an invasion. That's a personal thing. A back, for some reason, not personal, right? But that can be a little bit too much for some people, so you really got to feel those out, right? Sometimes you have those families, like, can I give you a hug? Yes, I accept hugs. You can pay me in hugs, right? I accept them. But some people just absolutely not. And a note on females, right? We also have to keep an eye on the boundaries. I don't know if you've ever dealt with a strange man thinking one thing happened, but that thing did not happen for sure, right? So touch for that kind of situation you might want to keep an eye on. But if you feel that a two-handed handshake is warranted, do it. I highly encourage it. It's reassuring. It makes them feel physically that you have them, unless they're in a state of shock. Did that confuse everyone? Yeah, is that kind of, okay. So, all right, so here is where you all come in, right? So we have 4 and 5. So this is what we're going to do. We have some time. Perfect. We actually have a perfect amount of time. So what I'm going to have everybody do, you're going to divide up into this section. You guys are going to be a group, and you guys are going to get together in a group. And you have this piece of paper, right? It's got a little worksheet on it. And the reason why I actually printed this out in this kind of way is so that you can take it home to your own funeral homes and have your own funeral homes do this, right? I also have something kind of like this about creating a positive communication work environment with your coworkers as well. But this one deals with our families in the arrangement conference room. So this is exactly what we're talking about up here, but I want you guys to think of some examples, right? So in your groups, maybe you can divide it however you want. Maybe each one take one, and then go through and just think, and maybe you all want to do them together, each one together. I'm going to give you like 5-10 minutes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to share those, okay? And then if you want, I'll gather both of them, and if you want me, I can email those to you as well, along with my examples. So go ahead. Okay, so we're going to come back. It's okay if you didn't finish. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to do some sharing. I know, I'm going to make you guys talk. So what we'll do is we'll just start with reach out. And I know that you were all sharing, and that was kind of the whole point of this, is getting you guys talking about these things and sharing your ideas and all that kind of stuff. So it really doesn't matter how far you got. So does anybody want to share about reach out, a verbal example?
So our reach out was when we have a family that walks in, we have no knowledge that they've had a loss, and it's by complete surprise.
And we don't know they're coming.
And yeah, we don't know they're coming. They just kind of show up.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know what they're coming in for, but how are we going to approach them? Because they're coming in for something.
Mm-hmm.
And then that verbal response was, I'm so sorry that you had to come here today.
Perfect.
I'm sorry that you had to share that information with me today. And I'm equally sorry that I wasn't aware.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the nonverbal response being your body position when you greet them, and the way our office is set up. When they come in, they don't greet us head on. They have to come in and come around.
Hmm.
And so we can step out next to them and talk with them.
Okay.
And then leading them into the arrangement room where we can talk privately
Mm-hmm.
is walking with them.
Yeah.
I shared that when you walk into the arrangement room with them, allow them to sit where they're comfortable, and then you sit accordingly.
Perfect. With your GPO, when you give them the GPO, when you walk into the room, right? No, that's perfect, right?
Yeah.
Do you guys have a different example or something similar?
Well, I have a different example.
Just for the people on
It's
the.
like when someone's calling in shopping, but it's not family. It's
Mm-hmm.
someone other than family, like a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh my gosh, so you have this responsibility to make the call. I said, that's a tough job for you.
Yeah.
So you have to do the one, you have to recommend a funeral home. I said, so my first advice to you is choose the one that you most feel comfortable with on your conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
So-
One thing about that, right? Care for the caregivers, right? We also want to acknowledge that they are helping the families and they're doing an awesome job by asking the right questions. That's one the way that we can reassure. I forgot to mention is telling them they're doing the right thing. Even if they're not asking the right questions. The fact that they called, you're telling them you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Right? So telling them, like telling the person who's doing the work for that family, I'm so glad that they have somebody to help them through that. That's awesome. Yeah. So I don't want to take up too much time because we have lunch. So protect. Anybody have an example? Anybody want to share that one? I'm gonna force you to. Somebody on this side. Did you guys get to protect?
We all wrote the same stuff.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. Yeah.
So this happened to me yesterday and the day before. A family arrived and their trauma prevented them from even going through the arrangement. They needed an autopsy. They came in and fell apart in my arms, and they needed an autopsy. So I called the coroner and arranged for an autopsy, and we couldn't proceed with the arrangement. We just needed to stop right there. And so I that's what I did. And she asked me, do we even have to continue today? And so no, we didn't. We stopped right there.
Yeah. You're literally protecting them from future harm of having to make decisions too quickly. So you're thinking about their long-term grief. That's awesome. Did you guys have kind of a different example of either verbal or nonverbal for protect?
I think we had just shared, especially if you're going out on coroner calls, which are obviously pretty abrupt for the family and unexpected. Just walking in and sometimes, especially because the coroner has a separate job from us, and sometimes it can feel very technical.
Mm-hmm.
Walking in and being that person who can be someone who can, even though he has to go through these things and you can't interfere with their job, you can just be there to kind of protect them as a shield from having to have it be cold.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just be a person who can, just like you were saying with that touch, or just kind of communicating that, hey, I'm going to be here, he just needs to answer your questions, and then I'll make sure that we get everything answered that you need, those types of things.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you don't have a tip volunteer type of person, a crisis responder, then you're it when you show up with your cot, right? So yeah, that's a good example. Reassure. Anybody? Did you guys get to that one?
Yeah.
Do you want to share yours?
I was gonna say we all kind of,
Yeah.
we all kind of ultimately determined that, I mean, the reassure, organize, and reinforce, they all go hand in hand. I mean, ultimately, all of them go hand in hand, but these especially. And we had talked about that with Reassure, addressing their concerns first off, like you had mentioned. If they keep bringing something up, it's really important to circle back to that, especially if they keep bringing it up. You know, address it in the moment and then go back, even unprompted, go back and address it again, saying, hey, we talked about this. I just wanted to remind you, here's what's going to happen, here's what this is, explaining whatever that major concern with them was. And that's reassurance in their own personal mind of, hey, you were listening, you are addressing my concerns first off, and that ultimately builds an important trust.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better. Do you guys have a Reassure? Or do you want to go ahead and give an organized? Does anybody have an organized one? I don't know if you guys got that far yet because I kind of interrupted.
We kind of went through all, like he was saying, we kind of went through all three of those because in that reassuring was just being organized and saying, okay, this is the process. This is how I'm going to get that need that you're expressing that you have. And you're showing your organization and reinforcing it by saying, I'm going to write down a note of what I said that was, when that was going to take place. And so all of those kind of, we kind of hit all at the same time because they all kind of were intermingled.
They are, yeah. And a lot of those we can also commingle with our body language and our paralinguistics, right? All of those kind of fun things. Anybody have anything for reinforced? You guys didn't get that far, right? Yep. Did you guys have, was that part of your reinforce?
We were talking about in your organization of writing down those things.
Yeah.
And I think you had mentioned it too, just reinforcing those things by giving them the list.
Yeah.
Of the finances or what they need to bring back or whatever.
And I had Rob send out the PowerPoint and that piece of paper that you guys have. I also told him I don't know if I have it on my computer, the current version, because I've edited a little bit. I have a template of that contract summary that I was telling you about. I kind of made a template so I can easily click in what it is and then delete. It's just an Excel sheet. It's super simple, right? So I'll send that to you. I have one for at-need and pre-need. And then I'll also send you the template that I use for, I call it the to-do list. So I'll send that home with you. It just kind of has, you fill in the blanks and you can edit it however you work. You just erase the lines that you don't need. And it also has due dates on that. I found that helps families a lot when you give them due dates. They don't always follow that, but it's helpful.
So we have a to-do list, but all of it's handwritten. And
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like, we have to change this someday. It's all, my handwriting is quick, and I'm just like, this is terrible, and it's embarrassing, so thank you.
Well, if there's a form that can be made for anything, I probably have
Oh,
one.
that's awesome.
Every time we have an apprentice, I call it their book o' fun, you know.
Yeah.
And so, so I'm going to get that to him, and he'll email it to everybody who's watching and all that as well. Okay? Other than that, I don't know. I think I was just going to, yep. Oh, I don't know where it went. Click. There. I think that was what I was ending on. Yeah. So there's my contact information if you need it. Pretty simple. And if you have questions, you can always email me directly, or call, or text, whatever. I do give my families a text number that they can text to. It's not my cell phone. That's my personal cell phone. I have a Google number. Apparently, I'm now from Cincinnati. But I give them that number that they can text to. I tell them, if you call it, I probably won't answer it because I am usually with families around services, but that is a good number you can text to and know that you got it to me, like a photo, or most people text these days. Nobody listens to their voicemail. So I always ask my family, give my families that option. So, all right, that's it. Let's eat.